What if I told you that one of the greatest intelligence hoaxes in history wasn't about guns, spies in trench coats, or secret gadgets? Throughout history, intelligence agencies have orchestrated mind-bending schemes that have rewritten the rules of espionage. But one tale stands out. This wasn't just a simple spy operation. It was a psychological chess game that played an entire nation like a pawn. How did they manage to pull off one of the greatest hoaxes in history? What secrets lay hidden in the shadows of this audacious operation? Buckle up and get ready to uncover the chilling brilliance behind a plot so elaborate that it left intelligence experts across the world in awe. Let's dive into the story that redefined the art of deception. First up, if you think the United States has the world's most powerful intelligence agency, then you're mistaken. Today, I'll tell you about an extraordinary intelligence operation that defies all human logic and imagination. The operation we're discussing today was carried out by a spy who sacrificed the most valuable thing any person could have, and continued this mission for 20 years. The hero of our story is the Chinese intelligence agency, which managed to outsmart the entire French intelligence system and infiltrate the life of a French official for 2 decades. This led to the leak of critical classified information, changing the course of our world today. We're uncovering one of the greatest intelligence hoaxes in history, executed by Chinese intelligence in France. While we usually talk about mysteries on Earth, this story feels like it came from Mars. Our story begins in 1964, amidst the Cold War, a time when the entire world lived in constant fear of an imminent nuclear war. During that time, Beijing was a closed city under the rule of the Chinese Communist Party, isolated almost entirely from the rest of the world. There were few connections with other countries until French President Charles de Gaulle decided to break the isolation and formally recognize the People's Republic of China. France became the first major Western power to establish full diplomatic relations with Beijing. This move shook France's allies, as the country was part of the Western Bloc, which included the United States, Britain, Australia, and Japan. Establishing relations with a member of the opposing Eastern Bloc raised many questions about France's motives and potential gains. Despite the criticism, France continued to build its relationship with China, culminating in the establishment of the French Embassy in Beijing in 1964. The embassy hosted several cultural and social events, bringing together diplomats, officials, and prominent figures from both countries. It was at one of these events that our chilling story began. A relationship developed between Bernard, the third secretary of the French Embassy in Beijing, and Shi, a Chinese opera singer. Bernard's full name was Bernard Boursiquot, and I promise you, no matter how far your imagination runs, you'll never guess the ending of this story. Before we continue, I want you to write in the comments what you think might happen in this story. What's the most outrageous twist you can imagine? When we get to the end, revisit your comment and see how close your guess was. This story doesn't involve nuclear weapons or spies in suits. It's a tale of love, deception, lies, and manipulation beyond anything you could imagine. The Cold War was like a volcano, constantly threatening to erupt at any moment. The United States and its allies were on one side, while the Soviet Union and China were on the other. The world was literally divided into 2 camps, each striving to impose its dominance without entering into a direct war. No planes, no tanks, and no soldiers. So, how did they fight each other? They relied on proxy wars and intelligence operations. During this period, nations were willing to do anything to gather information about their opponents. Intelligence agencies spared no method, even exploiting emotions to collect data. Each side sought critical information about what the other was planning or thinking. China, at that time, was particularly known for its innovative espionage techniques. The country was recovering from numerous catastrophes, including Japanese occupation, civil wars, and a tragic famine that claimed the lives of millions. Reports suggest that around 45 million Chinese people perished during the famine. After such devastating events, China was desperate for a genuine revival. Led by Mao Zedong, the Cultural Revolution marked the beginning of China's return to stability. With ambitious goals, China aspired to become a superpower, and that meant stepping into the world of espionage. On the other side of the story, France, emerging from World War II with a devastated economy and crumbling infrastructure, was also rebuilding itself. At the same time, it was dealing with independence movements in its colonies, such as Algeria, which gained independence through force in 1962. During this period, France also became involved in intelligence conflicts. At the French embassy in Beijing, Bernard, the protagonist of our story, worked as a third secretary. Although the position seemed modest, it carried significant responsibilities, including managing administrative affairs, coordinating between the embassy and French government offices, and writing political reports for the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In 1964, during one of the receptions organized by the French embassy in Beijing, Bernard found himself captivated by a Chinese opera singer named Shi Pei-pu, who would play a pivotal role in this story. When Bernard first saw Shi, his entire being was shaken. She was a beautiful woman with calm features, and her allure was anything but ordinary. According to Bernard's description, he needed only one look to realize that he had to speak to her and make every effort to establish some kind of connection with her. Little did he know that this encounter would change his life forever. Shi, or as we might call her, the Enigma, captured Bernard's heart with her beauty and operatic voice. During that period, opera in China was considered an elite and cultural art form, which made Shi a beloved figure in both high society and diplomatic circles. She was incredibly talented in her craft, which compelled Bernard to approach her and talk to her. As he had expected, his admiration for her only grew once their conversation began. Her style was mysterious and full of confidence, which attracted Bernard in an unusual way. The two agreed to meet more frequently and talk further. You might assume now that Shi was a spy and conclude the story here, but the truth is, the real story hadn't even begun. As you suspected, Shi was part of a significant Chinese intelligence strategy. She was one of a network of highly trained spies tasked with collecting classified information on Western diplomats and politicians, as well as recruiting new agents for Chinese intelligence. Since emotional manipulation was seen as one of the easiest ways to a man's heart, Chinese intelligence found their way into the French embassy through Shi. She exploited Bernard's admiration for her, and their meetings evolved from casual and formal conversations into a far more complex relationship. Initially, there were exchanges of gifts between the two, which eventually developed into mutual admiration and later, love. The relationship even became illicit over time. About a year later, in 1965, Shi told Bernard she was pregnant with a child. According to sources, the child had two potential names, Shi Dodo or Bertrand. Their relationship transitioned from a simple romance to one with a familial bond, fulfilling Bernard's long-held desire for a family. Bernard became an easy target for gathering secrets and information for China. While the relationship seemed natural and genuine, it took a new turn with Shi's pregnancy and Bernard's growing involvement. Since Bernard was a diplomat, it was inappropriate for the two of them to meet frequently. Being a diplomat, Bernard traveled often, attended meetings, conferences, and events. On the other hand, she had her job and was also pregnant, which made her mobility more difficult. Yet Bernard maintained his relationship with her because, in the end, she was Layla's mother. Their emotional connection deepened significantly during her pregnancy, as Bernard began to confide in her about his personal and professional worries. For Bernard, She was the only person he completely trusted and to whom he could express his repressed emotions. She made him feel at ease in his strange world, far from home. As a Frenchman in China, Bernard struggled with emptiness and homesickness, longing for someone he could trust. Bernard once said, "The darkness in which we met gave me a sense of safety, as if it shielded me from the world of espionage and politics. It allowed me to experience genuine moments of emotion." But what Bernard didn't realize was that this darkness was no coincidence. Their encounters were not random. They were carefully orchestrated by Chinese intelligence. The agency employed a calculated psychological strategy. At first, she appeared as a curious partner, asking routine, harmless questions. "How was your day at work?" Or, "Do you feel safe here?" Subtly building trust and lowering his defenses. This technique, common in espionage, made him feel comfortable enough to open up. She also played another game, appearing and disappearing from his life unpredictably. There was no consistent contact, which only deepened his attachment. Bernard believed this distance was natural, a sign of a healthy relationship, but in reality, it served the agency's interests. Or perhaps he wasn't entirely naive. Maybe he too had an agenda. After all, Bernard was a spy. Yet, despite any hidden motives, he missed her. He constantly asked to see her, but she always declined, citing severe pregnancy symptoms. She reassured him, saying, "I respect your time and position. I would never pressure you to come." When their child was born, she presented the baby to him, saying, "This is your son. But if you don't want to acknowledge him, that's fine. I understood your situation from the start. You're a diplomat, a politician. No pressure." Bernard, however, saw the child as a permanent bond of love. He told her, "I know I wasn't there for you, and I regret that. But I love you deeply, and I can't live without you." He acknowledged the child as his own. From that moment, their relationship entered a new phase. As a high-ranking diplomat, Bernard had access to classified files, sensitive details on Sino-French relations, and Western policies toward China. Information that Chinese intelligence desperately sought. Over time, Bernard confided in Shi, unaware that his words held value beyond their relationship. For years, she immersed herself in every detail of his life, and eventually, the agency pushed for more. They had been leveraging this relationship for years, without Bernard noticing anything. Shi's questions became sharper, more precise. She asked about meetings, diplomatic strategies, and even France's stance on China's nuclear program. He didn't hesitate. Believing he was speaking to his lover and the mother of his child, Bernard unknowingly delivered classified intelligence, offering China exactly what it needed on a silver platter. Imagine this. Through leaks they were able to obtain, it was revealed that France was monitoring China's nuclear development. France was spying to determine whether China intended to become a global superpower or not. They learned that France was unable to assess its relationship with China and was unsure whether China was an enemy or an ally. Chinese intelligence was able to uncover the French double standards, revealing that France said one thing and did another. With all this information at hand, China managed to control everything, intentionally leaking information to Bernard, making them believe that China was weak and fond of France, with no plans against it. In meetings and discussions, they sent people to speak in front of Bernard, showing that China was harmless and their nuclear program was still in its infancy, thus posing no threat. This calmed France and led them to export civilian nuclear technology to China, which helped develop China's nuclear energy program. They continued to gather information from Bernard about the meetings between French and Western officials, learning of France's intention to increase its trade volume in the Asian region. China then flooded the Asian market with goods at prices lower than French goods, taking advantage of this intelligence. During this time, a new character entered the story. He asked for a quick and secretive meeting with Bernard. His name was Kang Sheng, and he informed Bernard that the life of Shi and her son was in danger due to their connection with him. He told Bernard that certain factions within the Chinese Communist Party had discovered Shi's contact with foreign individuals, which made her suspicious in the eyes of the party. He explained that if she did not cooperate and provide the necessary information, both she and her son might be at risk. The information they requested was not of great importance, but it could save Shi and her son's lives. He reassured Bernard that this was not about spying, but rather about proving to the Communist Party that they controlled the relationship and that there was no threat. In the end, Bernard's choice was between cooperating with the party or risking his family's lives. This led to the party acquiring a bank of information from the French embassy. Bernard realized that he was involved in a big game and that he was the only one who could save his family with this information, despite feeling guilty for betraying his country. Of course, the Chinese intelligence did not stop here. The Chinese intelligence was involved in gathering information and extracting secrets systematically. Every time they obtained information, they would threaten him with his life and the life of his son. They would hide him at times and tell him that the situation was unstable and that he was under continuous surveillance. Eventually, Bernard began to feel that the situation was slipping out of his control, even though he too was a spy with many connections. In 1982, he was able to bring his son out of China. At that time, his son was 16 years old. Bernard and his son moved to Paris, where Bernard thought the threat had ended. It was too late. The Chinese intelligence in France was already aware of his situation. Up to this point, the story seems ordinary, tied to the Cold War and intelligence agencies. However, there are strange and unexpected aspects to this tale. The question that might come to your mind is, did the French intelligence know what was happening? Were the French intelligence services, one of the most powerful in the world, asleep? In reality, the French intelligence was struggling with political divisions at the time, which caused them to focus on their internal issues rather than following important cases. When they discovered leaks from the French embassy in Beijing, they started their investigation in 1982, 20 years after the events began. The French intelligence started monitoring the involved diplomats, including Bernard. There were suspicions about his relationship with the opera singer Shi, who was believed to be a Chinese spy. After lengthy investigations, it was discovered that Shi was indeed the source of the leaks, which included over 500 official documents. When the French intelligence decided to confront Bernard with the truth, the shock was immense. It turned out that everything he had believed about his relationship with Shi was a lie, and he had been a victim of long-term deception. The biggest shock came when Bernard discovered that the child he thought was his son was not his. The child whom he believed was his son had been purchased from a doctor in the Shenyang area with the help of Chinese intelligence. The biggest surprise was that Shi was not a woman, as Bernard had thought, but a man disguised in women's clothing. Can you imagine how she entered his life, acted aloof, spoke sparingly, and lied? When she gave him what he wanted, it was in the dark for the first time, and she made him fall in love with the atmosphere and the method. But for 20 years, he became obsessed with the idea that the relationship could only be this way. The important thing is, she or he was arrested in connection with investigations. She was in France, and the psychological shock was immense. Bernard went through a severe breakdown from the shock. He tried to end his life in prison, but his attempt failed, and he remained alive. Throughout that time, he kept asking himself the same questions. How did my emotions deceive me to this extent? Was everything I built with her over the years a lie? Was I really that naive? Is this possible? Although the situation was significant, its impact on Bernard was huge. It wasn't just him, it became a major scandal in French history. Bernard's trial in 1983 turned into a global media sensation. The trial was broadcasted through media outlets, becoming an intelligence case study explaining how major intelligence agencies exploit human emotions for gathering information. The trial became a public opinion issue, with the world divided into two groups: one that saw Bernard as an innocent victim in a big intelligence game, falling in love with a woman, or rather a man with no real existence, and the other that saw him as an instrument in the hands of Chinese intelligence, a traitor to his country, and that he should be punished even if he was unaware. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison in France, but the strange part was that both were released after only 1 year, in 1987, due to political and diplomatic pressure between the two countries. No one knows what documents China had or how they managed to resolve the issue and pressure France. Also, the case garnered widespread interest and became a subject of international controversy. After their release, Bernard lived in isolation and regret, but he lived with a partner named Thierry. His life changed after prison, though it's unclear whether he was always like this or not. Investigations revealed that he had been in a long-term relationship with Thierry. It became clear that Bernard hadn't been well from the start. Of course, communication remained between him and Dodo, who was supposed to be his son. Dodo settled in France, built a family, and raised 3 sons. Meanwhile, Shi Peipu spent his later years in Paris, occasionally performing in Chinese opera. Despite his infamous past, he remained a mysterious figure, embracing his notoriety while continuing his life as a performer. He lived this way until his passing in 2009 at the age of 70 in a nursing home, taking many of his secrets with him. His extraordinary story inspired David Henry Hwang's play M. Butterfly, later adapted into a film by David Cronenberg, delving into themes of deception, love, and espionage. When Bernard Boursiquot learned of his death, he felt a sense of relief, saying, "Thank God, he's dead. He did so many things against me and never once felt sorry." He saw no reason to pretend sadness, adding, "The plate is clean now, and I am free." His words reflected not just closure, but the deep bitterness left by years of deception. It is clear that Bernard couldn't overcome the feeling that he was a traitor to his country, and that he was foolish and naive. Bernard lost everything. His personal and professional life were ruined, and he lived with a sense of shame and betrayal. In 2 words, I would like to summarize the story and share some lessons we can learn from it. The story presents the first lesson. What happened to Bernard is a living example of how emotions can turn against you. Emotions can transform into deadly weapons in the hands of powerful nations, showing us how blind trust can make a person an easy prey in a world full of dangers. While love is a fundamental and beautiful feeling, one of the most wonderful emotions a person can experience, it can, at times, be used to conceal malicious intentions. This message is for all who are listening to me now. In the world of intelligence, nothing is off limits when it comes to exploitation. As we saw during the Cold War, it wasn't just a military or technological competition. It was also a psychological war. The great powers sought to achieve victory using hidden psychological means, far from direct attacks. The same methods exist in today's world, and we live them both in our real lives and online. There is a very high probability that the same techniques will be used today, and it is likely that they will be repeated in the same way. Therefore, do not attach yourselves to words coming from behind screens or even in real life. My words are for everyone. Always keep your mind alert and never let emotions dominate your judgment.